Hi, I'm Ankit. Thank you for joining me this early in the morning. I'll be talking about the fascinating topic of fine graining your access control. Don't worry about the jargons. A bit about me before we start. I am an identity and access management enthusiast, and I've been working on IAM product in miniOrange for 7 years, primarily focusing on MFA and access control. My goal today is to present my case why RBAC is not enough anymore and what we can replace it with, how we can replace it, and to explain all this before without making you all yawn. Uh, what will be the agenda today? First, we will see what are the challenges with the access control, how RBAC works, why it's not enough, and how to transition to a better policy-based method. And along the way, we'll discuss some case studies. So uh, the basic thing, what is access control? So it is what exactly uh, it sounds like. It is managing who can access your resources and what actions they can perform on those resources. Why it matters? Because you will have a lot of sensitive data in your organization. You will want to prevent any unauthorized access and to ensure the compliance. It's really important for the compliance. Your lawyers will love you. So one type of access control is role-based access control called RBAC. How it works basically is you assign a role in your organization, and based on those roles, they are given access to resources. So an admin will assign roles like HR, finance, DevOps, and based on that, they'll get access to either employee data or accounts or servers. But what's the problem here? So it is easy to implement, that's not a problem. It is scalable, but it cannot handle dynamic conditions like when is someone accessing this, or which device they are accessing it from, or which location they are accessing it from. So you don't have any control over it. You only assign a static role, and based on that, they get access to the resources. So the challenge is, first, it's very static, right? RBAC doesn't care if you are accessing resources at 3 a.m. from a shady Wi-Fi, and you can do it. There is over permissioning risk. Because you are creating a role and assigning resources to it, you might assign that role to someone who doesn't need all the resources, right? It doesn't need all the servers or other resources, and you might be providing them that. Then there is a role explosion. So role explosion is basically, as I said, you will want to have a fine-grained control. So you'll create a lot of roles. Like even for a very small access change, you'll create a new role, and within no time you'll have a like plenty of roles in your organization, and it will be a headache to manage. So that leads to role explosion. And ultimately, the staticness of RBAC, it actually creates a problem with compliance. So to get over with, a lot of IAM products, they build solutions around them. But a simple solution which you can go with is just a policy-based approach. So what's the solution? It's not actually a solution, it's just a little improvement over RBAC. It's called policy-based access control. Uh, it's not actually pronounced payback, it's payback. We are all professionals here. So how it works? So same, you assign some roles, but you also define a policy of when these resources can be accessed. You can define policy based on time, location, device, IP, any attribute. And so that policy engine checks whether you are in the correct context when you are accessing the resources, and based on that, you are given the access. So I think I said that first. So there is a real-time evaluation, and that's why there is some granular control. And because you are defining policies, you are not don't have to create separate role for each and every user or each and every different access. So you are actually managing it better. So we'll take some use cases of how this particular use case is solved in RBAC context and how it can be solved in PBAC context. So let's take one example of a consulting firm, right? Let's say you have some permanent employees, and because you are a consulting firm, you have some contract-based employees as well. And the contract-based employees will need access to your resources. They will need access to the servers or the code base, and but they should be able to access it whenever they need it. Now, in a general RBAC approach, you assign role to your employees. You have some permanent, some contract-based employees, and based on those roles, you assign resources to those roles, right? The check will only be if this particular user has this contract or permanent role, and based on that, you provide all the resources. So what's the problem here, right? You are doing a role check, but first of all, you are providing excessive permission. Your permanent employees might be needing more resources than your contract-based employees, and since you just have a simple role check there, you might be providing, let's say you have two different contractors, both needing different resources, right? So if you just define one role, you are providing both of them all the access. The second solution will be you create different roles for these two contractors or these two types of contractors, which leads to a lot of temporary roles and which leads to explosion. uh, there is no context. Yeah, you don't know if whether your contractor is accessing these resources from the devices which were assigned by the company, right? They might be accessing it from their neighbor's device. You don't know that, and you don't know when they are accessing it. Actually, your contractors should be able to access it only when they are in the office time, and people use VPN or firewalls for all this, but there is a very simple solution to this. And yeah, as I said, from an unauthorized device, the resources can be accessed. So how PBAC implements it? So we'll just take a look at a small XML-based policy code. This is XSEML. This is how policies are defined generally. So if you can see here, what we have done is we have created a rule to allow and a rule to deny. The first rule to allow will first check for the role. If the role is contractor, which is fine, happens in RBAC as well, then it checks the time. The time range should be between 9 to 5. And finally, it checks the location. Yeah, it doesn't exactly look like this. I simplified it a lot so it fits in this slide, but it will be a lot bigger, the policy. And then we define a default deny rule. So it denies all which doesn't sit in this policy. And all your policy engine has to do is at the time of access, it has to just check these parameters. So let's see. Again, I assigned the role to my two types of employees. But this time the policy engine is, whenever they are accessing the resources, it is checking the IP where they are accessing it from, it's checking the device, it's checking the location and the time as well. And based on that, they will be assigned access to the resources. Now again, uh, so you are given permission based on context. Your temporary roles are not needed anymore, right? Because based on whether you have assigned a resource to a particular user, you can define that as well in the policy, which we'll see in the next use case. And resources can only be accessed from organization provided devices if you assign a device or IP check to it. So that solves most of the problems there. Uh, Now let's check another use case. It's a bit different. Let's say you have a healthcare organization, and healthcare organizations, they generally need HIPAA compliance, which basically means control on who can access patient records, right? And doctors should be able to do that. So again, generally I'll assign one of my users a role of a doctor, and this doctor should be able to access the patient records. But now what's wrong here? Let's say we forget about when they are accessing the location and everything. We say they are accessing it in the hospital itself, right? But still, what's wrong here? First of all, it's not being checked whether the patient is assigned to this particular doctor. The role doesn't check that. Like, everyone has a doctor role. So not every doctor should be able to check every patient's record. I know now you can assign a higher doctor role and everything to it, but that's not really needed. There is no consent check. You have to really get a consent of the patient to access the record first. For this, generally what we do is we implement workflow and everything, but that helps when you are accessing it for the first time, or but it doesn't help during runtime or during the resource access. It doesn't help with the checks. it's easy to it's easy to error out on those checks. So this is not HIPAA compliant. So we'll see a different policy code to see how this is implemented. So first we check whether the role is doctor, and then we check whether the current user is assigned to this record. And finally we check if the current record already has a patient context provided to it, and I hope it's visible. If this all is true, now I have skipped the time and IP and device checks here because we had covered that earlier, but you can assume it will be there as well. Uh, so in this case, if the patient is assigned to the current user, and if the current record has a consent already provided to it, then only the access will be provided, otherwise it will be denied. So the same is done here. So if the access is provided, the first record is done. If there is no patient assigned, it's denied. If there is no consent, it's denied. So this basically helps you get the HIPAA compliance without building a lot of complex systems around it. Now, how to transition? Many IAMs focus on RBAC, and they already have RBACs implemented. Many organizations have that implemented as well. So how to transition into PBAC? Because it looks simple, but it's really a complex system. So first, what you need to do is you need to evaluate your current framework. What kind of access control are you doing? I mean, it changes from organization to organization, and you'll have a very small set of access control you might be doing. So after that, you just need to define what attributes you need. So as I said, there are a lot of attributes you can check: device, location, IP, but you might not need all of them. If there are some records which can be accessed only on premise, if you are not providing devices at home, then you might not need the location permission and everything. So you have to keep it very small and simple, because policies, if not managed right, they can go haywire as well. You might have a lot of complex policies which will be a headache to manage. Then you establish a policy framework. So access CML, which I just showed now, is a very popular framework which you can define for very basic policies. And then you run a pilot program on a very limited set of resources. Don't You should not be implementing it system wide from the beginning, because there are a lot of intricacies which go wrong in these cases. So you run a very small pilot program, and finally is you just redefine and refactor based on what problems you face. So what are the benefits? So I think we already went through those. So obviously you have some enhanced security, because your risks are reduced because it's not static anymore. The user experience will be better because you don't have to keep assigning different roles to them and have them keep waiting for the role to be assigned. They can automatically be managed. The It's good for compliance. Uh, your I think your legal team will like it a lot. And finally, operational efficiency is much better because you are managing very few policies compared to a lot of different roles. So what are the challenges? Obviously, there are some challenges to it. First is it can be very complex. We saw some very basic policies, but there is a lot of code involved in that as well. And because of the hierarchical structure, there are a lot of chances of going wrong there. There could be a lot of and or clauses. Then the integration, many legacy systems. So RBAC works well, or PBAC works well when it's on your system only, but when you want to propagate it to all the apps or the other devices that you are connecting to, a lot of legacy apps may not support it. So it requires a lot of efforts or building special connectors to support that. Uh, there could be a resistance from the organization, which there usually is in such complex systems. And scaling will be very difficult, is particularly very difficult in the policy based system because of the complexity of the policies as you start applying it to all the resources in your system. right? And this can also lead to policy explosion as well. So instead of many rows, you will have many policies if not defined correctly. So we'll do a basic recap. Okay. So role RBAC is just static role base, while PBAC is attributes and policies. There's a lot of flexibility in policies, but not in RBAC. Again, there is a lot of context awareness as well, but the complexity is higher in policy-based access system. So if you are running a startup or a new business venture, I would say go with RBAC initially and then transition to PBAC. Uh, Implementing PBAC from the beginning is never a good idea because it introduces unnecessary complexity which you might not need. So starting with RBAC is good, but ultimately you'll have to transition to PBAC. So the takeaways: RBAC is effective, it works, but it's a bit limited in bigger organizations. PBAC provides the flexibility and granularity which you'll need in a bigger IAM system. And transitioning will require a lot of planning, but you'll have greater results. So, and this is it. If you have any questions or you want to provide any feedback, you can scan this QR code. My email and my LinkedIn IDs are there as well if you have any questions, and I think we have some time to take questions as well. So, yeah, if anyone has any questions, yeah.
To understand what is the major difference between ABAC and, because that also attribute based, attribute based access, and this is policy with attribute. So what is the major difference in that? I
Yeah.
think both are same, right?
Yeah, so ABAC is a bit better than RBAC because it, instead of checking rows, it checks your users attributes as well and the system attributes as well. But there's still no dynamicity to it. So the consent based thing which I defined earlier, you won't be able to achieve that in ABAC because ABAC still focuses a lot on the user who's accessing it, right? It doesn't focus on the resource itself. PWAG, the policy which you define is around the resource. The rules which we define are whether this resource can be accessed, right? So this is the main difference between both. Even RBAC is very specific to the user who's accessing it, the role of the user. ABAC is to the attributes of the user or the environment of the user, but not the resource itself. So in PBAC, there's only one addition is you can define policies around the resource. So that's the main difference in there.
And the use case which we discussed more towards the like how user is accessing the resources, but when it comes to service access, right, or the service to service call, uh, what your view how we can utilize the payback model in service to service call?
I think in service to service call, mostly you will have to rely on RBAC or ABAC in that case because uh, services are mostly trusted. So this PBAC I think is mostly for the insider threats which you don't get from the services mostly, but on the access of service you can apply payback, like who is accessing the service itself which is making the background call. So in that case payback will be applied on that service, but the service can work with the rules itself. That's why if you, even if you go with if you deploy Kubernetes pods and everything, only roles are checked there because the service to service call you don't have any insider threat from the service itself, but those who are accessing the service. So on that service access you'll have to apply policies. Sorry?
STO also would be the one option.
ST?
Yeah, STO.
I have no idea about that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have one question that what is your opinion for the hybrid model? It is that includes the role base as well as the policy base.
Yeah, so most of the times you will have a hybrid model itself because as I said, uh, when you start off, and every company just starts off, you
Yeah,
will always
exactly.
have RBAC there. And you will always implement policy on a very small system of resources. So you'll have this hybrid model as well. And it's very difficult to go to completely policy based
Correct.
entirely because that adds unnecessary complexity. See, policy base is more secure, but it's complex as well, and we are looking to make things secure without adding complexity. So if RBAC works, it should be the first priority there. always.
And what about the audit of the users? Whether it is in a policy base, majorly, it is a secure. So mostly complex environment, it is also adapting. But if you check the report that what permissions user is having in that, so is there any centralized something to get that
Any centralized something to get what?
system, any centralized system where we can view the user which is having the permissions and all those things?
I think most of the dashboards you can check that, but that will give you permission based on the role itself. You can provide attributes to it, like you can build a central system where you can provide the attributes and see if in this case the policy will be assigned, like if the resource will be assigned if you create a policy based system. But that central dashboard, seeing a static content on it will be a bit difficult. What you can do is you can provide a user, provide the attributes and see if it's working or not. So in that case, you can build a dashboard like that, because if you see want to see a central dashboard where if the user has assigned access to it or not, that again this is just role based.
Role.
Always will have access.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think if there are no more questions, we are done. I hope you liked the session and thank you for showing up early. I think we'll start with the next session from this point on. Thank you.